Hello and welcome to the Take Charge podcast. Telo Trucks Take Charge in this episode, as I'm joined by co-founders Jason Marks, who's the CEO, he appears on the left of the screen, and Forrest North, the CTO, on the right. We talk about the EV truck market and their mini EV truck, which is designed by the world-renowned designer Yves Behar, who is also a co-founder, as well as the Chief Creative Officer at Telo. I really enjoyed talking to the guys about how trucks got so big in North America, the safety and efficiency issues it's brought, and how the EV truck market needs to become more human-centric. Lots of fascinating data and figures flying around in this episode, and we hope you enjoy. So, Forrest, Jason, it's time to take charge. Jason, Forrest, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Interested to learn more about Telo Trucks and your journey, kind of where you are in the journey so far. There's been some big appointments recently as well, one in particular, so we'll learn more about that. But first of all, tell me a bit about your backgrounds and what led you to co-found Telo Trucks.
Why don't you start?
Sure. I started working on electric vehicles all the way back in high school, made a radio-controlled solar car, and then I joined the solar car team at Stanford. So I've kind of been in EVs since the very beginning. That team kind of turned into the early team at Tesla. I was on the battery team there. And then I left and started an electric motorcycle company called Mission Motors. Just staying in EVs. I thought at that time, I was like, oh, EVs are here. Everyone's going to make them now. So I'll work on charging. So I started PlugShare, which is an app to find charging stations, and then did some worked at FreeWire as well, which is a battery-backed fast charging company. And then it still felt like, you know what? I thought EVs were all going to be here, and there still seems to be like big gaps and not new companies, and major OEMs don't seem like they have their heart in it, despite announcements. And so when I met Jason, was really excited to get back into building EVs that would help the climate crisis.
Yeah, so my background is actually on the other side of automotive. I started my career in semiconductor, where I actually worked on some of the very first radar and LiDAR chips, developed some of the technologies that went into what actually became autonomous driving chips. Transitioned to work on some of those autonomous driving systems and the driver assistance systems at some of the major automotive companies. So actually worked for many years for big automotive, the giant OEMs, developed a lot of the technology that went into making sure their driver assistance systems were safe. And I realized that there was so much amazing technology being poured into autonomy, but it wasn't really being used to save people today. There's a lot of we're still seeing a massive increase in casualties on the road, and especially a massive increase from casualties from pedestrians. We're at an all-time high in the history of automotive from casualties from pedestrians. And I really thought that there's a unique opportunity to look at a different form and footprint of a vehicle and leverage technology from the autonomous space in vehicles that have technology that are viable today to save people's lives. And so that's when we got together. So my background is really on automotive safety. Forrest's background is one of the pioneers in electric battery packs. And together we're able to actually do what we do.
Amazing. Well, my first question was going to be why Mini? Safety, I guess, was one of those key drivers. What else kind of inspired the design of the truck?
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons why there's so much truck bloat in the world right now. The number one best-selling vehicle from 1994 to 2008, if you look it up, it's a two-door Ford Ranger. It's a small truck. It's less than 200 inches long. It's the size of what today's sedans, really. And now the number one best-selling vehicle in all of the U.S. is a Ford F-Series, which is 20 feet long. And there was this. We always thought it was just maybe Americans all love giant trucks, and that's what people kind of think. There's a connotation of Americans love giant trucks, and Americans. Many do love giant trucks, but that wasn't the driving factor as to why we have giant pickup trucks in the U.S. as a number one selling vehicle. It was actually we found out later, it was this weird unintended consequence of regulations that were created back in the 1970s, modified in the 2010s, that actually kind of forced automakers' hands at building giant trucks. And I'll explain that here in a sec, but effectively that unintended consequence of government regulation had this downstream effect that's been absolutely devastating for us. Yes, trucks are way too big to actually navigate, especially in downtown cities and suburbia. But they're, like we just talked about before, pedestrian deaths are at an all-time high, and trucks kill 3 times more pedestrians than any other vehicle on the road. And one of the craziest things of all is if you look at the landscape of all carbon emissions across every single economic sector, like that includes an industry,
Agriculture,
everything,
residential.
Yeah. If you look at the carbon emissions across everything, you can actually pinpoint 10.5% of that originating from one thing, light duty trucks. So we have this crazy downstream effect of just such negative aspects of these giant trucks that are on the road. And myself personally, I drive a Toyota Tacoma. I live in downtown San Francisco. I have a 150-pound dog, so I take him to the beach every week. So I love having a truck. Having a truck is awesome. You're everyone's best friend. You can go mountain biking, you can go snowboarding, you can take your dog to the beach. That's awesome. It's so useful. But God forbid you ever have to park it in downtown San Francisco. It's virtually impossible. So all this was cascading together, and we were thinking, if there's just something we could do differently to solve this problem, to solve the pedestrian deaths problem, to solve the carbon emissions problem, to solve the sheer size and bloat and space that was taken up by these vehicles, and still give us a vehicle that we actually love and solves our main challenges, we should do it because it doesn't exist right now.
It's I was actually at the battery show in Novi, the EV and battery show in September, and I was stood with a client, and there was a huge EV pickup truck, massive, and we were just talking about it, and he was talking about the amount of battery power and density that needs to power it. I didn't think about the safety element. Naively, it just didn't spring to mind. It was more about the kind of power and the efficiency and things. So, very interesting.
I mean, you're 100% correct though. Just electrifying giant pickup trucks doesn't solve the problem. It makes a number of other problems. So if you take a pickup truck that already weighs 6,500 pounds, you add another 2,000 pounds of battery pack to it. Maybe you get a 9,000 pound pickup truck, which we've seen already, being advertised. Now you've got a vehicle that tears up tires, and those tire particles go into the roadways. They destroy roads significantly faster than other vehicles. Some bridges you can't even drive on. And then the number of sheer raw materials that have to go into a 229 kilowatt hour battery pack is outrageous. We talk about having lithium and cobalt and nickel shortages. Well, if you're building battery packs that are 200 plus kilowatt hours, then that's certainly not going to help you at all in the supply chain.
And just the energy efficiency. So on a energy standpoint and a climate standpoint, those giant electric trucks are less efficient and produce more carbon than a small gasoline sedan.
Wow.
So, if it's just your daily commuter, you'd be better off maybe sticking with a small gas car than getting a giant electric truck.
Wow. So that would be less efficient. So a large, huge electric truck would be less efficient than a small combustion engine.
Yeah. So if you look at you can look at it in two ways. You can either look at it as a mile per gallon equivalent kind of rating. So MPGE is the metric that we use to determine the carbon emissions of electric vehicles. And some of the giant electric pickup trucks that are advertised in the market are worse than 60 miles per gallon equivalent. And there exists gas cars and hybrid cars that are upwards of 50 plus miles per gallon. So you can almost compare apples to apples there. But then if you really want to dive into the math of it, what you would do is you would look at how much, where am I getting my energy from to actually input into the battery pack when I'm driving? How clean is that energy? What are the carbon emissions of that energy and where it comes from? So if I have to take in 229 kilowatt hours of energy into my battery pack every 300 miles, well, how much carbon emission do they actually create trying to move that energy into my battery pack?
So when did you both have this kind of light bulb moment where you kind of came together, you saw these problems, and kind of talk me through the story of actually founding Telo Trucks?
It's kind of one weekend really that we pivoted. We were working on an electric motorcycle.
I want to show you that here in a sec.
Oh, nice.
And we kept showing kind of that. We were trying to get people excited about that motorcycle. And we were talking to people, and it kept coming up. We had this idea of a mini truck in the future, and people were like, "Oh, I want that."
Even motorcycles. So we realized that although we were super excited about this transportation in cities thing, that was fundamentally the problem we were trying to solve. Was transportation in cities really is miserable. So Forrest had a thesis around micromobility. I had a thesis around motorcycles. We were both working in the same space and working together on a number of different things. And we both look at each other and we go, well, on the motorcycle side, motorcycles are very much a passion project, a hobbyist thing in the US at least. Not in Southeast Asia, people use motorcycles all the time for commuting, and it's extremely common. In the US, it's not nearly as common. And if you look, we looked at the number of electric motorcycles sold all of 2021, and we realized that like this is not a huge market. People are not super excited about electric motorcycles, and the disadvantages kind of outweigh the advantages. For example, if we look at it from a technical perspective, the thing that's really driving the range you have of a vehicle is two things, like the aerodynamic losses that you have, so the wind resistance and the rolling resistance of the vehicle. Rolling resistance is a matter of weight, really, and motorcycles are light, so they have very little rolling resistance compared to a vehicle. But your aerodynamic forces that are against you when you're actually driving a motorcycle are pretty high in comparison to just a regular passenger car. So if we look at the coefficient of drag times the frontal area, which is what you're really looking at in a motorcycle, in any type of aerodynamic situation, the coefficient of drag times the area of a motorcycle is about a third that of a passenger car. So the energy required to go a certain range is virtually a third of that required on a motorcycle. So if you wanted a 300-mile motorcycle, you would need a battery pack a third that of a Tesla, for example. So a 35 kilowatt-hour battery pack to go 300 miles. You're talking about a 1,000-pound motorcycle that's not going to be fun to drive. So that's really fundamentally the math was against us, and the market was against us, and it wasn't really solving the problem that we wanted to solve. So we had to go out and figure out, how do we actually solve this problem around city commuting? And we found out the biggest pain point people had where they wanted utility vehicles. Consumers wanted them because they love having the ability to go outdoors, and it was COVID, and people were just like, I want to get out, I want to go do things. So a utility vehicle is the way I'm going. But we then found out that the commercial side needed utility vehicles that were smaller, because there's so many pickup trucks that do work in downtown cities like downtown San Francisco, and if you talk to any of the contractors working there, they'll tell you horror stories about having to park a mile away from their job site, carry their 50-pound bag of tools to their job site, go out to lunch, and they're not going to drag that damn thing back and forth another mile to their truck, so they leave their tools at their job site, they come back after lunch, tools are gone. Like, it's just this miserable story of like, if just they could park next to their job site and carry their stuff from their vehicle to their job site, their lives would be significantly improved. It'd be, an hour less commuting every day because of the walk to and from their job site, and it would be significantly cheaper for them long term. And we just found so many stories about people that work in downtown cities that have this same problem. So everybody that, there's little things that you don't really anticipate, like people that have to pull garbage bins out of underground parking lots because a big garbage truck can't go and pull a garbage dump bin. Well, they have to drive that thing from their repo 100 miles to these underground condos, and they have to lift to a 2,000-pound garbage bin to pull it out to the street up a hill. So it's kind of a utility vehicle. You need to do that, and you need to have a range of at least 200 miles to get you to and from this. But if you use a big truck to do that, which happens is you're not going to be able to fit in the parking lot. You're not going to be able to make the turn that this thing is parked in around. You're going to hit the side of it, and you're going to damage your vehicle. So it's just these cascading series of things that anybody that does work in a downtown city has these problems.
You've made me think. I live in Barcelona, Spain, and I see everywhere the kind of obviously they work for the council, and they have these small vans which are either hybrid or electric, and they're collecting garbage, or they're kind of sweeping up the streets, and loads of little things, and they're very small. And at first it was a bit alien to me coming from the UK. It's not always as present, but they can get down onto the beach. There's kind of narrow little areas they can get down to the beach, and kind of narrow streets at times. So you've made me think. Well, kind of around the city, yeah.
No, you're spot on. And there's a unique set of requirements, especially in in American cities, because they are fairly spread out. So in order to go from one hub to another hub, that could be 100, 200, even 300 miles. And American highways are fast compared to a lot of other places in the world. So you have to be able to go 70 miles an hour consistently over that time period. So you have the range anxiety is a very real thing in American cities because they're so spread out. But once you get to the city, then you have the challenge of actually navigating the city.
Well, then this might be your area, Forrest. Talk me through your kind of battery advancements, who you're partnering with, the performance. I think I saw 350-mile range at the moment for the truck.
Yeah, we have a very compact battery, but it's still liquid cooled and very safe. We have our technology is really a cell to pack technology. and we've been building battery packs now for a long time. We get we've really optimized both for density of the pack in the X and Y axis, kind of like front and back, side to side, but really in the Z axis, like up, top to bottom, because any height that your battery, which, understandably has to be underneath the floor of the vehicle, any height of that battery pack translates into height of the overall roof line. Eventually, right? Like you need a certain amount of space for the occupants, and so that keeping it really low really cuts down on the aerodynamic drag, which Jason mentioned earlier. So we pack 106 kilowatt hours into this chassis that is the same length as a two-door Mini Cooper.
And really, we had to innovate a lot in both the way you connect electrically and the way you connect thermally to cells in order to do what we do. It's because we needed to get that range, and we needed to do it in the smallest size possible. So really the metric that we're looking at is volumetric space efficiency of our vehicle. The watt hours per liter, that's what we're really optimizing for.
So we're about 450 watt hours per liter. Some other competitors out there are more like 270. So it is quite dense. It's still liquid cooled. We still fuse every cell, and it's a very compact pack. Yeah,
and one of the beautiful things about what we're doing is everything we've designed is for manufacturing. So really the goal is that this can be done without manipulation of the pack, and every single cell is at 3.7 volts until it's at full voltage. So we have a process that can be manufactured in about 5 minutes from start to finish, from cell to pack. And that's really key because the battery pack is the most costly part of the vehicle. It's like out of the cost of goods, the battery pack is always something that everyone talks about. And if you go to a contract manufacturer, they're not going to feel comfortable just building you a battery pack. And the battery pack is the root of the vehicle. It's what used to be the engine of the vehicle, but now it's the battery pack.
Yeah, I would say that part of the design probably people don't think about, but having been through the experience with a large automaker here in the Bay Area, setting up a battery factory, there comes a point where you realize like you're dealing with humans who are putting together something that's extremely high voltage, and at some point you're trying to get your labor costs down, so you don't necessarily dealing with PhD level labor, and the dangerousness of a pack is real, and so we have designed it so that we can put it together with as little time in that kind of danger zone as possible.
Wow. In your opinion, what do you think will do? Because with the Telo truck, you've obviously got the consumer in mind and the markets in mind, the way it's designed, the size, and things like this. In your opinion, what do you think would drive consumer adoption more? Longer range or extreme fast charge? What do you think is going to be the key driver to adoption?
Well, that's a great question. I did work in charging a lot, and I've driven an EV now since 2011. Charging is really parking, and that's and so it's the question of fast charging really only comes to play with people that don't have a dedicated place to park, which is a lot of people, but not necessarily a majority in the U.S. at least. So we need a whole variety of charging programs. To me, like I've almost never gone to a fast charger. I've done it to test them out and to go on long trips, but my daily driving is I get home, I plug it in, it's always charged. It works great. And going to a gas station for one of my other vehicles, my wife's vehicle, is really annoying, right? Because it's unpredictable. You don't know when that 20 minutes is really going to have to fit into your day, and it takes longer than people expect. So charging is misunderstood by a lot of people. I would say that people think fast charging maybe is the thing that they want more than they actually need. So some of the stats are, like only 10% of the long range EVs that are out there have really they get about 10% of their total amount of energy from fast charging. So it's it's a small percentage of the actual energy, but it enables those trips that you want to take. So to that point, we are North American Charge Standard is the standard we're going with for the plug on the car. People may know that as the supercharger network. That is the only network that I have seen after working in the field that's really actually reliable. And the thing about reliability is that it really amplifies in the user's experience. So if something works 10 out of 10 times, you'll never notice it, right? But if something doesn't work, you feel like it doesn't work half the time, even though it might have been 1 out of 10 times. And so there's this, it's just like every other consumer electronics play. You've got to get to those like 4 nines of 99.9999 reliability for people to really trust that it's reliable. And the supercharger network is the only thing that's even close to that.
No, very good. It depends state on state, doesn't it? People's driving habits and things, but it's an interesting race in terms of what's gonna prevail as the key adoption driver. But that sounds good.
It really depends on your consumer too. I mean, fundamentally, you ask the question, what do our consumers care about most? Well, if you look at our consumer base, if you look at the demographics of people that purchase our vehicles, we've got a lot of people that are super excited about this in the Midwest and the South, so I don't want to downplay their excitement, but the majority of our pre-orders come from downtown Los Angeles, downtown San Francisco, Seattle, San Jose, New York, DC area. So it's really the biggest metropolitan areas that are looking to move over to transition to our vehicles. And if you look at their driving habits, they're going to be significantly different than someone that lives in rural Texas, where they have an 85 mile per hour highway that they can drive for hundreds of miles and not hit a city. And I know that because I used to live in Texas, and I've done that drive before.
Maybe to go back to your question, I don't know if I fully answered it. It's a combination really of range and charging. I think once you get over 300 miles of range, it's charging that people care about. But I really think 300 miles is the minimum that you need to have for a vehicle, for it to be a vehicle. Yeah. We have gotten some pushback from people in cities, like, why does it have to be so long? Can you get a cheaper vehicle with shorter range? I have a short range vehicle, a 2011 Nissan Leaf that I still drive. It gets about 60 miles of range. It's great for 100, like I drive it every day. It's for my commute, but it's really limiting to get outside of that commute, and that's not what people want in a vehicle.
Yeah, I've had to ask him many times, hey, do you want to drive us up to this meeting we have in San Francisco from our offices? And he's like, well, I brought the Leaf today.
Maybe a taxi.
And that is the thing with vehicles, is that they are kind of skewed towards the 1% times you need it, but it is a very expensive purchase. You want to be able to handle that 1% use case where you have to drive all around the Bay Area in one day, and that can put 200 miles on. Like Uber drivers and Lyft drivers are putting 200 miles on a day easily.
No, very good. Let's get into the design of the truck, because I saw recently the announcement of Yves Behar. Yves Behar, who is now the co-founder and chief creative officer. So a really big deal in terms of bringing him on board. How did you persuade him?
Yeah, so Yves and I worked on an electric motorcycle back in 2009, and we launched it at TED down in Long Beach in 2009, TED. And it was a great experience working with him, and I really got to see how that side of the world works, and he's very good at that. So it was, we were trying to get him involved, and once he did the designs for the vehicle, he got very excited about our project, and he's been wonderful, absolutely instrumental.
Yeah, I will say, Yves, us being both engineers, background, you always have this aversion to design, like, oh, those designers, they're going to try to ruin everything. But I never would have expected how impactful the things he's done have been. Mm-hmm. So the way he looks at and says, okay, I'm not going to try to change any of the engineering you've done. I'm just going to bring the engineering you've done to the forefront with some design that really speaks to the demographic you're going after, to the market, and to everything you're trying to do. And it just totally changed the direction of what we were doing. It went from purely engineering activities to we're building a company that really is going to make a difference in the world. And that was Yves doing.
Yeah, and another reason that we actually he was like the third or fourth designer that we'd had involved, and we had some more traditional automotive design involved early on because we thought, okay, let's see what they can do. And we got great designs and everything. But one of the cool things about my experience with Yves is that he's really thinking in the future. And that's what you have to do for design, because it takes 3 years, 4 years to get a vehicle all through all the processes into the market. You've got to have it be fresh then. And then another thing about design is that with really good design, it can be timeless, and it's often not appreciated when it's launched. Like he brings up the Porsche all the time, 911 back in the day was actually not, people didn't like it when it first came out, and now it's like this storied classic. And so modern design, and so we were building a truck for the city, so we really wanted something that was a modern design and that kind of deviated from the car design, which the kind of traditional auto design, which is a little bit more busy, is a little bit more fast fashion. It kind of changes year to year. It goes angular, then it goes smooth. Kind of like flip flops back and forth. So we want to kind of go more towards this modern, simple design, because if it can be a good design for longer, it's actually better for the environment, for the buyers, for everyone, right? Like, let's get more use and value out of our assets.
So the current design, that's Yves' design. So do you see it changing between now and launch? How do you see the future? Maybe kind of any additions or edits?
Yeah. So, Yves going to continue his role as Chief Creative Officer and continue to make improvements to our design. One thing that you may or may not have seen is we have a number of different iterations of our truck. Our light duty truck, for example, comes out of the gates as a crew cab, 5-seater, 5-foot bed. That's kind of the standard default pickup truck that you get from our vehicle. But it's very easy to reconfigure our vehicle into a van with sliding side doors, into a 7-seater or 8-seater SUV with a third row of seats, or just a standard work truck with just 2 seats and an 8-foot bed. And that all fits within our chassis and our platform, and the design changes slightly because we have to add and modify things, but it's all reconfigurable from our core element. Now, you asked about kind of the future of our company. All the technology that we're developing and in the platform we're developing is really around making vehicles significantly more efficient. So electrically efficient and space efficient. And that's going to really bode well for the environment, right? So there is a future where we could have different types of vehicles that follow that same plan of making space efficient and electrically efficient vehicles. And Yves would be involved in that.
Very good. I didn't think about the idea of the future design because, as you say, 3-4 years, so I like it. I think it's a good design. There's some electric vehicles that come out and maybe not quite my cup of tea, but it's good. And yeah, I think it's doing a really good job. So in terms of the state of the market, so you guys have obviously done a lot of research. You start looking at the motorcycle market, didn't see as much of an opportunity, and I think you've identified a really interesting niche here. What's the current state of it? Where do you stand in it, and where do you plan to be in the future?
Yeah, so now I'll go back to that story I alluded to early on, right? I know I kind of sprinkled on a little bit of that story, and I'll pull back into it. So to look at the state of the market, you kind of have to go back to how the market was created. So back in the 1970s, I'm going to go way back, the EPA was established, and one of the first things they did was address the U.S. gas crisis. So the U.S. had a big gas crisis, and regulators were like, we need to just save gas. We need to use less gas in our vehicles. And so they set up a bunch of regulations and said, automakers, any passenger vehicle you build, you need to restrict the amount of gas you're using. You have a certain amount of mile per gallon that you can hit for your passenger vehicles. But what they did is they exempted light-duty trucks, thinking that these are being used for work, they have to do a job, we shouldn't make too many restrictions on them. And that held true for many, many years. The automakers actually kind of wisened up and said, okay, if we just build more SUVs and call them light-duty trucks, well, then we're going to be able to build a little less efficient vehicle. It's going to be easier to get to market. It's going to be less expensive for us. So eventually in 2010, the EPA again wisened up and said, you know what, that's not going to fly anymore. We're going to put a set of regulations for light-duty trucks. So you're going to have to hit a certain amount of miles per gallon for your light-duty truck. But the way we're going to let you kind of adopt for commercial use cases is we're going to base that on the size of the vehicle, the length and width of the vehicle, the footprint. And so they gave him a chart that said on the y-axis, it said efficiency. And on the x-axis, it says footprint. And it goes down. So the bigger the footprint, the smaller efficiency the worse efficiency you're allowed to have.
Okay.
And what happens is, you think about it, it makes sense. If you build a semi-truck, it should be less efficient than if you build a small passenger truck. That intuitively makes sense. It should have been that way. But the reality was automakers got to a certain point and said, hey, if we build this truck this way, we're not going to be able to hit the efficiency metric that I need to hit by the EPA with this motor, with this platform. So what if I just make my vehicle a few inches longer? Oh, now I'm able to hit that efficiency. So they kept sliding down that curve. And that's why you saw this massive explosion in trucks from 2010 up until now. It's because everyone slid down that curve, because eventually that curve flattens out, where it's no longer beneficial to make your vehicle bigger. It's just more expensive for you to build, because there's no more efficiency that you're able to gain. So every single automaker now sits at that inflection point where that line flattens out and says, I'm going to make my vehicle exactly this footprint, because it gives me the biggest opportunity to have the most flexibility in my emission standards for my vehicle. And they built a brand around it, and they created this big vision around it. So if you literally go and look at every single automaker now that builds vehicles in the US, all of their trucks are almost the exact same wheelbase and track width, because that's the metric that they're using to actually hit those efficiency standards. But what it did was it created the whole market of big trucks, and it got people excited. All the branding was around big trucks, and new entrants into the truck market, the electric truck makers. They looked at that and said, okay, we're going to take the pickup truck and we're going to electrify it. And the pickup truck now sits at this giant standpoint because of the downstream consequences of these regulations. So I'm going to electrify that. They didn't have to. They weren't beholden to the EPA requirements. They could have built their pickup truck in any footprint, but they chose to go electrify the existing footprint because that's where the market existed. But it didn't exist because of consumer demand. It existed there because of downstream government regulations. Now, that is just the reality of now us having giant trucks. But if we look at how people use trucks, there's 20 million trucks registered in downtown cities in America. And they turn over at about a rate of 2 million per year. So there's about $300 to $350 billion spent on light duty trucks in downtown cities every year that are just too big to do the jobs they need to do. And that's the market that we're looking at, and that's why we're addressing this specific market, is because it's unserved for a very unintuitive reason.
Wow. I had no idea about the specifications and the emission, kind of meeting the emission requirements and thing. That's fascinating. And then
and the automakers, the automakers generally have like a set number of powertrains that they've developed, right? And it kind of turns out that just based on physics, it's a bit easier to get more power out of an existing powertrain you already have than to get more mileage, like to make it much more efficient. Like so it was a generally easier path for them to pick up the powertrain they had, make the vehicle larger, and then add some power.
Wow. So I guess it wasn't driven by design and thinking, okay, let's make big trucks sexy. It was, okay, we need to make the trucks bigger to hit the emission requirements. Now let's make them sexy, and let's kind of get the trends going. So that's fascinating.
And not just to be clear, there is a lot of use cases for big trucks, but not as many as we probably are making right now. So, if you want to tow a horse trailer, across the country, you want a big truck. And that's going to be really hard to electrify at this point with the charging network as it is. So you don't want to build an electric truck that competes against gas and diesel trucks, because that's a really key component that they can do that you can't. So that's another reason that the middle of the country, the rural areas, like they're going to have big trucks and they actually use them. Cities have a different use case. They're much more about going to the mountains, going to the beach, supporting commercial industries. We've talked to caterers. We've talked to all sorts of people who are doing business in the city. They don't haul giant things. They need the utility of a truck.
Amazing. It just reminded me of a funny memory. I was in Rome. And the really narrow streets in Rome, and there was this van coming down, and it was causing carnage. There was obviously people eating out on the streets, and they had to kind of like lift the whole tables, and the waiters were coming out, and because the truck was still a small truck, but I guess we're going to be seeing these throughout Rome pretty soon.
Yes, Europe will be a great market for this truck.
Yeah, definitely. I can see it here in Barcelona. I think it would work really well. I'm looking forward to pre-ordering one.
Yeah, and in fact, I spent time in Barcelona, and that's exactly where my mind went. Is when you painted that picture of like a van going down to, I was picturing like a cobblestone area with like people eating out on the sidewalks. Exactly, my mind went to Barcelona immediately.
There we go. I've just identified a new market for you. So just in terms of how you position the market, how have you worked your pricing and specifications, things like that?
Yeah, so I mean, the pricing is very in line with what we think about as like the middle of the market for both gas and electric vehicles. You know, the $50,000 price point is really kind of core to when we surveyed the market. That was really what we thought of as people using as their daily driver vehicles in today's market. And when we look at the total cost of ownership, you know, an electric vehicle over a period of 5 years ends up costing about $10,000 less than a gas vehicle over that same period of time. You know, everything included, even trade-in value, everything, you still save about $10,000 over a 5-year period. So you get a little bit more. That's why that number actually is fairly alluring. It's almost equivalent to buying a $40,000 gas vehicle, which is really where we're looking at when we're looking at people that are already buying vehicles in cities. They're buying SUVs that can do a little off-roading. They're buying crossovers or very small, whatever smallest truck they can find on the market. That's really what they're looking at, and that's what we're competing against. But we have a unique set of specifications that make it so we're not just having a price war with somebody. You know, we're really, the size of our vehicle is the core advantage to our vehicle, which is really unique about what we're doing. Most people, when they think about a small vehicle, they think lethargic, slow, they think loss leader. You know, none of that is true of our vehicle. The size is the core advantage. The fact that you can do everything you can do with a full-size truck in a vehicle the same length and width of a two-door Mini Cooper. So you can actually navigate the cities, you can actually do the things you want to do, but you can also haul 4x8 sheets of plywood or cement or dogs or your family. And that's really why we think we have a unique value proposition in the market.
Very good. I was going to ask kind of who you've designed the truck for. We've already kind of discussed that a little bit, but let's go a little bit deeper. Kind of what demographics, kind of what vision did you have when you were designing this truck?
Yeah, you know, we looked at a lot of the successful vehicles in this space right now, and there are a few that have a couple of unique characteristics that are really cool. Like, if you go to Hawaii, you see just as many women as men driving Jeep Wranglers, and so somehow they did a really good job of kind of going after both those demographics. You know, you see a lot of people that are super excited around crossover SUVs and SUVs that can go off-road, and it's kind of agnostic to your walk of life in many senses. So we wanted to provide a vehicle that was approachable for both men and women, for people that are in the age range between 18 and 45, that live in downtown cities, that maybe have a couple of, either they don't have children yet or they have a few small children. That was really the core of our demographic that we were looking at.
And we did notice that, you know, during the pandemic, you know, the younger generation started to, you know, get a lot more into outdoor sports. You know, there was a huge pet ownership went up. You know, like it used to be boomers were the biggest pet owners, and now it's millennials. So there's been some shifts, you know, that the pandemic kind of accelerated, I think. And so we think that in the city that this is kind of like there'll be a resurgence of the usefulness of truck, especially if you have pets, kids, and you like to go outside.
Yeah, I bought a mountain bike during the pandemic, you know, and I was not alone because it was almost impossible to get a mountain bike during the pandemic.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, what you mentioned there in terms of people getting dogs in lockdown, I was one of those people. I wasn't even considering it, and then lockdown happened, and I'm even drinking out of a pug mug. So that's
Nice.
That's who I am now. I'm a pug daddy, is what they call me. Yeah, I mean, he doesn't need to sit in the back. He can sit in the front seat. He's fine with a seatbelt, of course. But for your 150-pound dog, maybe not.
Yeah, I have an Anatolian Shepherd. He's 6'2" when he stands up on his hind legs, and when he goes to the beach, no other dog gets quite as dirty as him for some reason. Like, it's just completely caked in sand and seawater. So there's no freaking way he's going in the back seat of my vehicle.
Yeah, I would say we have 3 dogs and 2 kids, and so most of the time the dogs are, you know, we don't take them all with us, but we would like to, you know, and so right now we don't have a truck.
Yeah, of course. Amazing. 6'2" stood up. I think mine's maybe 2'6" stood up, so not the same. Yeah, probably is. Good stuff. You kind of alluded to it a little bit before, competitors. Do you see any competitors doing this? Kind of, do you see any threat in the future?
In this specific area that we're going after, the light, like the very small light duty trucks, there doesn't really exist much of a competitive space because it's been wiped out by the last 20 years of automotive development. I mean, there are people that are purchasing vehicles that would look at our vehicle and it would compare it to a smaller crossover or a smaller SUV. We feel like that's probably what people are looking at as they're evaluating our vehicle. And that's really in the competition space. There's plenty of crossovers and SUVs. But there's a unique value to having a truck that we think will really stand out in that space, and especially one that's the size of a two-door Mini Cooper. I mean, really, if you type in that number, 152 inches, into any auto, like the entire repertoire of automobiles that are on the roads today in the U.S., like there's only like 3 vehicles that are that size right now, and it's wild. Like the smallest SUV is just under 160 inches, and it's two-wheel drive. So it's crazy just how big we've gotten in terms of the average vehicle in the road. So we do see people that would evaluate our vehicle against other vehicles, but we also don't really look at it as in terms of just straight competition. And also, to answer your question, I answer your question on the consumer side. On the commercial side, we feel that people are looking at mid and full-size trucks, and that's our competition there. And it's a very key delineator. It's like, if you're looking at a mid and full-size truck and you're like, well, it really stinks that these things can't fit into my job site, well, then it's very clearly like, I'm going to go with the Telo truck for this particular purpose. And we've heard that from fleet owners that are saying things like, we own 10,000 of this specific type of full-size truck. We would turn it all over if we could, because we are just spending so much money to try to justify the giant trucks here.
Brilliant. So how does the future look for you guys? Talk us through the plans for the coming years and the roadmap.
Well, as of last week, our skateboard platform of our vehicle, the core chassis, now drives, and it rips. Like it'll hit our 0 to 60 benchmarks in 4 seconds. We're about to have some video we'll post here in the next coming weeks of it driving uphill and off road and having a heck of a time. So that's an awesome milestone that we just hit, and it was our next major milestone we needed to hit. So a couple videos you can now see. I think they're posted both on our Instagram and a couple of different news articles that we could share as well. But we're super excited to actually have a demonstration driving vehicle that's ready to go. Now, kind of looking into the future, I wanted to make sure that I address this, head on. There is a lot of doom and gloom in the automotive space right now, especially for automotive startups. Like, we've seen a graveyard of electric vehicles over the last 20, 25 years, right? The first one that came around, Tesla, they had success, but they had to fight for it, and they got there.
And they weren't the first. There were a lot of failures before that too.
But they got there, and there's a lot of EV companies that came after to moderate levels of success. Some failed immediately, some made it big, some look like they're going to succeed in the long term, which is awesome. I think that's good for the industry. But really, we like to think of ourselves as EV 3.0. We've kind of taken the learnings over the last 20 to 25 years and applied them to the current state of the market right now. And it's a really unique time in the market to be building an EV. And it lets you do things that are a little different than what the other EV companies before us have done. So, for example, one of the biggest differences right now is that we have commercial off-the-shelf components that we can buy directly from automotive suppliers that other automakers had to build themselves from scratch, and it cost them hundreds of millions of dollars to do that. So motors, inverters, battery management systems, things that are really like core to the drivability of the vehicle, you can now buy them off the shelf. The electronic power steering system, the electronic
booster, brake booster.
These are things that
the VCU, like these are like ASIL D certified now and off the shelf, which is just a huge change.
Yeah, it's insane how much is available commercially for you today, which really greatly reduces the cost of not only the cost of building a vehicle, but the cost of validating a vehicle and getting it ready for the homologation process. The fact that these systems come pre-certified with software on them, man, that is a couple years of effort that would have taken otherwise, and $100 million of effort that would have taken otherwise. So that's one big piece of the pie. The second big piece of the pie is that there is a kind of a reckoning happening in the U.S. Like, there's a huge push, and you've seen our news articles just today about it, even around how we need to get to carbon neutrality. We need to make sure we offset all the carbon emissions. Climate change is really a really big part of the conversation in politics today, and it really is true that, like, in order for us to do this and do it efficiently, we need to kind of look at manufacturing and look at how we're actually bringing vehicles to market differently. So in the past, there's been this connotation that you had to build a giant factory, you had to build 50,000 to 100,000 vehicles per year, and that's when you finally hit economies of scale and profitability. And in order for us to actually compete in the market, that can't be true anymore. You need to hit profitability at a faster time period for less money than ever before. And we've seen other countries that have been able to do this, and it's very much knocking on the door of the U.S. automaker industry. Like we have countries that have actually found out a way to build an electric vehicle, quick turn it in a year, and deliver it to consumers for $10,000. And unless U.S. is able to do that same thing and quick turn for low volume vehicles at profitability, then we're going to see a big changing of the guard in the automaker space. So what we believe is that with the current state of government incentives and manufacturing in the U.S., we can actually build vehicles profitably at a tenth the volume as ever required before, which is a really unique item here. It means a tenth the cost, and it means a tenth the investment that we needed to actually do to bring vehicles to market. Of course, we want to scale well beyond that to get to tens and hundreds of thousands of vehicles every quarter, but we need to hit profitability much, much sooner, and that's what our financial model necessitates. The third big part of that story is how you actually develop a vehicle. So in the past, you've had to build hundreds of test beds of vehicles. You have to validate each of the different electrical components. You have to build many prototype mules. You have to crash a ton of them. And the world is now so much different because of so much innovation in software. So we can now develop and we can test a vehicle almost entirely in software. Another automaker coined the term 100% virtual validation, and we abide by that. We only want to crash 1 to 2 vehicles to bring our vehicle to market. And you've seen other automakers that have been able to do that in recent times. I mean, Koenigsegg with their Gemera crashed 1 vehicle for both US and European homologation. That's awesome. We want to be able to do the same thing, and we can do it because of the state of the art in software.
Wow. So from each of you, Jason and Forrest, what's the top lesson that you've learned since establishing Telo, and what would you advise anyone else who's kind of going through this process or thinking about going through this process?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, building a little bit on what Jason just said, I mean, the biggest surprise for me was how developed all the components were, like at what a high level they were, and they weren't when I was at Tesla. We really developed everything in house, and that's just such a huge change in both time and money. So I would definitely recommend to anyone starting a company now to try not to reinvent the wheel, and to try to, I think what we need to do is enter a period of time here where there could be a lot of new electric vehicle companies that really focus on getting something that provides utility to the customer and not trying to differentiate on power and speed anymore. Like we've seen companies that because then you have to develop everything on your own again, and for what ends? Like, so you can shave like a tenth of a second off of a 0 to 60 time. It just like, that's not the direction we need to go for the planet. We need to take all the stuff that we have right now that's off the shelf, put it in vehicles, and get it in people's hands so they can be driving electric every day.
Yeah. Well, you say that yours is going 0 to 60 in 4 seconds?
Right, which is plenty, and that's with all off the shelf stuff, right? Like, but if we wanted to do it in 2 seconds, we'd have to like spend a lot of energy developing stuff. Just to give you some numbers, like roughly, when you start going below 4 seconds, if you want to, every tenth of a second you drop, you either have to shed 100 pounds or add 100 amps.
Wow.
So it starts to go up very quickly, of the amount of effort it takes, the wire sizes and everything. And frankly, 4 seconds feels like insanity. I mean, it's still fast. Like, people probably can't detect the difference between 4 seconds and 3 seconds.
No. No, definitely. And it's 500 brake horsepower?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Good stuff.
And that's, again, with completely commercial off-the-shelf components. Like, it's crazy how much is available to us today to do that, which has just never existed in the past.
Nice. And then, but what's still what doesn't exist, I would say, and something that we learned here is that, the battery pack, I think people have in their mind from consumer electronics that batteries are just something you buy and that they would just be like commoditized. But once you get into a bigger any kind of vehicle or machine, the battery pack has to be really specified and developed for that use case. And so the battery pack is kind of the heart of the brand. It's what defines that 0 to 60, the range, the longevity, the safety, like all those things are wrapped up in the battery. So it's very hard to just say, I'm going to build a vehicle and I'm just going to buy the battery from someone else. And people have tried that business model. There's been a bunch of startups that have tried to we're going to make batteries for everyone. And it's hard because it's such a core to the product that battery team and the product team have to be really aligned. It's hard to have that be outside.
Yeah, and to answer, so I know you said each of us answered the question.
Yeah.
So my
sorry,
no, it's great. I think this is really good. I think the most surprising to me in this process has been the general reception. I feel like any founder that starts in this space, in any space actually, especially the consumer space, they're building something that either they really want or they know somebody close that really needs, and they get kind of attached to it emotionally and everything. And then you have this huge, you're so nervous when you launch it to market, and you're thinking, is anybody going to like this? Is anybody going to want this? We set some pretty lofty goals. We wanted to get to 1,000 pre-orders in the first 3 months of our launch. And we were sitting there just what happens if we get none? Well, the biggest surprise was that we got to 1,000 pre-orders in 3 days after launch. And we had such an explosion in popularity. We actually wrote on the board, the funniest thing, we wrote on the board, get 5 news articles written about our vehicle. That's our goal. We are at nearly 150 right now as we speak. So there's generally people just the validation you get when people recognize what you're doing and they say, yes, that is exactly what I want. Why hasn't anybody been doing that? That's awesome. And I think that was, in terms of everyone talks about surprises that hurt you, this is a surprise that really was heartwarming in many senses. And it really kind of got us inspired to really push and keep going. And then that's the big piece that I'm going to answer in terms of what to tell other founders in this space. And that is, especially in today's market, perseverance is key. People are if you've got something that you think is going to make the biggest difference in the world, people will listen to you, and you'll eventually find somebody that really wants to be a part of that journey, especially if you can build the defensibility around it. So I would say, don't stop, keep iterating and keep A/B testing your messaging until you can find the people that want to join your journey and get in there with you.
Nice. I was before this conversation, I was fascinated about Telo Trucks, and after hearing you guys, the passion that you speak with and the research that you've done and the solution that you've put together, it just makes so much sense. I didn't really think about it in the way that you guys have, and of course, because you spent countless hours doing this, but I think it makes complete sense, and I'm rooting for you guys. Hopefully it goes really well, and it's amazing that you've got those pre-orders, you've got an amazing designer that you're partnering with, and looking forward to seeing how you guys develop.
Appreciate
Wonderful. We appreciate the kudos.
No problem. And just finally, to finish off, how do you think the EV truck industry will look in 10 years? And maybe how would you like it to look in 10 years?
I'm gonna take Forrest's answer before he says it, because I know exactly what he's going to say. He's going to say that any truck or vehicle in general with a long nose in 10 years from now is going to look completely dated. You're going to think, why do we have those things going around? And we're going to think about automotive safety a little differently, and we're going to create even safer vehicles by eliminating that nose. And that's going to be a major staple in the industry of when to design change. Well, when we cut off the nose of the vehicles.
Good stuff.
Yeah. I would say I hope that there will be really trucks in every size again, which there used to be. And we'll get out of this kind of monolithic giant truck because, for a variety of reasons, and we've talked about all the environmental and everything, but just the walking down the street, if the street side is just covered in giant trucks, it completely changes the feel of the street. It's just imposing. It doesn't feel human-centric anymore. And I just think that's the wrong way to go. I think Europe is, you've probably experienced this much, Europe has considered this a long time ago and doesn't have as big of vehicles on the streets. But here, just in the last 10 years, we've noticed in the areas that I live in, it just feels less inviting to go walk around when you can't even see the other side of the street because there's just a line of giant trucks.
Yeah, when your hood's the size of above your vision line, not only is it impossible to see where you're going, but it also, like, you realize, like, if that thing hits you, it's hitting you in this area of your body.
Yeah.
And that's not a survivable impact. So that needs to change.
No, definitely. Well, I mentioned my pug before. He's called Joseph. He doesn't like cars or vehicles. He's really strange. He barks at them. So the smaller the truck, the better as far as he's concerned. Anyway.
Great. Pug approval.
Pug approval, yeah. That's it. Well, I'll check out those videos you mentioned, Jason, and we'll put them in the links so people can kind of watch them as well. But yeah, really appreciate you guys coming on the show, and yeah, good luck for the future.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
Really appreciate it.